Hi there. Introducing a new series to this channel, which is an exploration of Gnostic riddles that have sprung into my mind. And the thing about language and written language is that ideally, it shouldn't be too reductionist or based on logic. There should be an element of play in language and absurdity. And like the bird is on the wing, but that's absurd because the wing is on the bird. Kind of that would be kind of the sort of thing I'd be talking about. And so I'm going to present these and very briefly talk about them because they shouldn't really be analysed too much. The sound of one hand clapping, or the monkey is climbing up the pole. You just leave these things. You just you know say these things to people and let them get on with it. Let them apply it to their own lives and analyze it in the way that they want to analyze it. Perhaps just a picture comes to mind, but it's got to be positive. I mean, if I said to you, "You look ugly in that dress," that's a negative, judgmental thing to say. But if I say, every man, every woman is a star, we tend to think of stars as beautiful, twinkling in the night sky because of the Earth's atmosphere. And therefore, that's a kind of nice positive thing. Then I'm also implying that you are a star, and you sort of imagine yourself walking the red carpet as well. And why not? Because whoever you're walking the red carpet, and as far as I'm concerned, so everybody's a celebrity. Not just people who happen to be in the right time, place, and met the right people, and yeah, maybe had talent, but also they had a big of a makeover. And there's a lot you can do in the studio to make somebody sound better than sing better than they actually are. You can improve vocals no end with lots of jiggery pokery in electronics and digital manipulation. So, and then of course there's all the airbrushing that goes on for people's faces and figures and all that. Anyway, I digress. So on to this, the first of this Gnostic riddle. And the Gnostic riddle is transcendental dogs, immanent gods. And I meant by this, I think, really, as far as I understand this thing, is that this riddle is that every sentient being has the potential, given all other things being equal, when they're in a calm mood, of having unique Gnostic insights into the transcendental divine. So transcendental dogs. So a dog can be trotting along, and they can have a moment of insight into the transcendent realm because they are sentient beings and they have the capacity to do that. Indeed, it could be argued that even an earthworm, which has rudimentary central nervous system, or two of them actually, one at each end, could have a moment of insight. And they may not be able to articulate this insight or do anything with it, or it may not mean anything to them, but nevertheless they have a Gnostic experience. So that's what I mean about you take a dog that has a brain, and this brain is made up of millions and millions of neuro connections, just as a human brain is. From this material base, this neuroplasticity of the dog's brain and the neurotransmitters, which are chemical substances of great complexity, and everything is being put there by a genetic endowment. You take this material brain, and this material brain, by some method and by some way which we know not what, because it's a mystery, is able, despite its materialistic basis, to have a transcendental, insightful experience by which they gain access to the ineffable realms, you see. And that goes through you and me as well. And I suppose dog is the opposite of dogs as the opposite of gods. But the other part of the riddle, which is the immanent gods, is really pointing out to you that 99% of all beings, of all gods, have made a deal with the devil, as it were. They have put themselves into this world. They have compromised, if you like. They have been attracted like moths to the candle of materialism and material power. And most of the 99% of gods are in fact archons and aeons and demons of various kinds that have traded in soul for magical and worldly power. And not even just worldly power, but power that emanates to other worlds apart from the world that we see around us today and now. So be careful when you're dealing with gods, so-called, because they most of them, as I say, well, 99% of them, in fact, might as well be all of them really, have done this deal with the demiurge. And they're now part of they're part of the demiurge's army of distracting you and filling you with dismay and disheartening you in various different ways in order to keep you here. So they're part of the matrix of distraction, which actually prevents you from having transcendental experiences. And I mean, to go back to the transcendental dogs, a dog isn't going to have a transcendental experience if it's hungry, starving, if it's beaten, if it's neglected, if it's imprisoned, if it's lost, if it's worried about food, if it's in the wild, and if it's worried about predators of various kinds and human beings of other kinds. It's obviously not, it's going to be too frightened, hungry, worried, stressed to actually have a transcendental experience. So that's one thing to bear in mind. And the things that keep the dogs from having these transcendental experiences are the immanent gods. And they are responsible for meting out the distractions to keep the dogs, sentient beings of this world, from partaking of the Eucharist of the divine, basically. So it's important to be comfortable and non-stressed, or as non-stressed as possible, and not to be worrying about your next bite to eat, or fearful of abuse, in order to have the transcendental experience. Although it is possible for some sentient beings, very advanced human beings, in fact, to take a negative experience and use that as a sort of propelling force to take you from this negativity to extreme positivity. So that a transcendental, somebody who is contemplating the transcendental God all the time, they could be in the lion's den, they could be in a dungeon, and yet they could still still have a transcendental experience. And I think of Van der Post, who was in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. And there were three things that he maintained, or he said he maintained. One was his humanity, and his forgiveness of the brutal Japanese guards, brutal Japanese prison system, on the one hand, and he also kept alive the transcendental insights that he had when he was comfortable. He kind of remembered the transcendental experiences that he had when he wasn't in the prisoner of war camp before the Second World War broke out. And the other thing was that he actually made a crucifix out of a piece of wood that he found. And he didn't have, he had only blunt instruments to make it with, so it took him a very, very long time. But it was a kind of contemplation in itself, and a symbol of transcendence of the soul above the evil of this world. So he was in the evil situation of being in this Japanese prisoner of war camp. But this little crucifix that he was creating out of wood, in a sense, was kept on reminding him of the truth, because it's easy to be totally distracted from the truth in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, obviously, when you're starving and fearful and frightened of abuse and imminent execution and all that. So that's what he had. And so I guess some very aware sentient beings, possibly just human sentient beings, and possibly only a few human beings, are able to even in the midst of anguish and extreme danger and extreme terror, are able to nevertheless center themselves sufficiently in order to at least remember the transcendental experiences that they had when life was more comfortable and less dangerous. So anyway, so that's my sort of interpretation of transcendental uh, dogs and immanent gods, and also to make the distinction that every sentient being has the potential to go up the ladder, whereas those gods, those beings, and even human beings that have made made a deal with the devil to exchange love for money, as Albrecht does in the ring cycle of Richard Wagner. Albrecht is an example of a human being that sells his soul to the devil in exchange for money, and sells his soul to power and ambition and ultimate ruin in exchange for the Rheingold. And so it's possible, you see, for gods to do that as well. And then you must ask yourself whether these gods and whether these people are trustworthy. Those gods and people that are eaten up with ambition and avarice, can you actually trust them to be guides along the pilgrim's path? I think not. But if you do trust them, well, you have been warned that they are singularly untrustworthy beings and unreliable, because they're only really thinking of their own stuff and their own access to power, which is power usually at your expense and the expense of other sentient beings and other gods and other beings. It's a totem pole, it's a greasy pole, it's an ecological system of predator and prey, and the biggest predators get the prey, and it's dog eat dog in the cosmos, even on the astral and psychic and etheric levels. It's dog eat dog. It's a rough world that we inhabit, or rough worlds that we inhabit. So there you are. There's my transcendental dogs and my immanent gods. And so I'd rather put my faith in a dog than I would in a god. To be perfectly honest with you. And I like dogs. Perhaps I like dogs better than people. But certainly I like dogs better than gods, generally speaking, apart from the one true God, of course, and the Holy Spirit, that is the transcendent subject about which the transcendental dog has, or maybe has, his or her gnosis of.